I'm Madeline, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. That's why we created DreamBank, an inspirational community destination and digital experience dedicated to dreamers everywhere. From our daily event series to immersive signature programs, there's something for every dreamer. Our always free offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and stay motivated. Now, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Aliza Pressman is a developmental psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience working with families and the healthcare providers who care for them. She is the author of New York Times bestselling book, The 5 Principles of Parenting, Your Essential Guide to Raising Good Humans, and the host of an award-winning podcast, Raising Good Humans. She is the co-founding director of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center and is an associate clinical professor, um, and she holds 2 degrees from Dartmouth College, Teachers College, and Columbia University. We are so excited to have you with us today, and I will just pass it right off.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I know time is so precious, so I'm honored that everybody's here, and I'm going to try to make sure that I get your questions answered and give you a few nuggets to take home with you that will help just bolster your confidence in your everyday parenting and maybe give you some ideas about kind of how to make the choices that feel best for you and your family. I want to say that I am not an expert in your kids. So if something I say doesn't resonate because you just think, no, it's different with my kid, you know best. That's always going to be true. So with that in mind, I humbly offer the science and some of my perspective, but I absolutely want to stress that leaving here today, you should feel better about your parenting, not worse. Otherwise, I didn't do my job. It's not you. This is sensitive stuff. And today we're focusing on these 5 core principles, which are kind of rooted in the science and lead to resilience. And the reason I chose those principles, did I stop sharing? Guys,
You
I'm not
did.
so tech savvy, but we'll get there. These 5 principles are part of why I chose them is because there's no work for your kids. This is all personal work. There's no work for your co-parent. There's no work for your family, your friends, the teachers, anybody but you. If you are a teacher or a caregiver, there's no work for anybody but you. So this is about the science that influences our children's development, but doesn't ask anything of our kids. And the reason isn't that my book has a whole half of it that's talking about skills that we can help our kids build to bolster resilience. But that's after we do our work, and we can build skills in our kids. Like there are ways to bolster certain skills, but that is quite different than doing the work that we need to do where we can control the work that we put into it. So that's why I chose 5 things that are rooted in science that are in our control. And when I talk about resilience, these are 5 principles that sort of are the path to resilience that are in our control. Please know that resilience is sort of a constellation of factors that go into bolstering this. Like resilience is like not one thing. It's a constellation of skills and circumstances that can lead to having capacity to bounce back in the face of adversity, setbacks, and significant sources of stress. So I also like the quote, you can learn a lot. This is on my slide, so I have to think in my head right now since I have no idea how to access the slides. But you can tell a lot about a person or learn a lot about a person by looking at these 3 things: tangled Christmas tree lights, a rainy day, and lost luggage. I think that was in the wrong order. And I loved that quote because when we talk about resilience and like sort of bouncing back in the face of adversity, setbacks, and significant sources of stress, sometimes we forget that a lot of times we're talking about the like everyday resilience that isn't about the big stuff. So these 5 principles are going to bolster the skill to deal with the everyday stuff like the lost luggage, and also in doing so bolster the sort of real resilience that helps us manage ourselves in the face of so many other things. And when I think about what I want for my kids and what so many parents that I work with want, and also my friends and family, we're kind of thinking, I hope my child doesn't have to experience true adversity, setbacks, and toxic stress. But I do know that they're going to experience everyday stress. And I do know that they're going to have lost luggage, rainy days, and tangled Christmas tree lights, or the equivalent in whatever religion or ceremonies you might practice. And so I'm talking about that kind of resilience too. Like you hopefully are only going to have to manage with that. But we need to build the framework for kids who can get through mountains of things, because life is unpredictable, it's uncertain, and we need to be able to navigate it. We can't sort of curate the life that we're going to provide because we can't control the world that way. So, the 5 principles that are in our control that are highly linked with resilience. And when I say highly linked, these are the biggest environmental influences on our kids. That doesn't mean that we can control like temperament, which I'm going to spend just 2 minutes on. That's kind of how your child comes to be in this world and how they respond to their environment. You can't really change temperament. Temperament is something that is maybe fixed is the wrong word, because it's fairly fixed, but the way it presents itself might be different depending on the environment. And the parenting environment is the most powerful. And when I say that, some people get relief, like, oh, I have an influence, like, that's great. And some people panic, like, wait a second, I don't want to think that like every move I make influences my child's resilience and general development. I like to think about it with relief. Like, no matter what challenges in their life circumstances, and no matter what temperament they have, because some temperaments are hardier than others, I know that I can be of some influence, positive influence on my child's life. That's awesome because I can control me. And so I'm still not going to tell you the 5 principles yet, because I just want to give you a couple things to keep in mind about temperament. Temperament, like I said, is sort of kind of, this is the crude way of describing it, but it's just like how you respond to your environment. So, and this is, you're born with this. And so when you think about it, there's a researcher, Thomas Boyce, who looked at temperament through the lens of flowers. And so he describes orchids, dandelions, and tulips. And when I explain this, I think it will resonate, because you're going to think, I mean, of course, people aren't like categories. There's like, in this metaphor, there's a garden of billions of different kinds of flowers. But generally speaking, we are orchids, dandelions, or tulips. And orchids are incredibly beautiful, but if you've tried to raise an orchid, I have, like an actual orchid flower, it doesn't go well with me. I'm not good at it. And so every time I tried to raise an orchid when I was younger, like it would be a stump and it just like didn't grow, because I just didn't know how sensitive the environment was for that orchid, that the orchid needed to be in just the right amount of sunlight, water, and soil. And if I overwatered or under, that was a problem. Whereas on the other side of it, a dandelion grows through the cracks of a sidewalk. And if you think about that metaphor, and a tulip is somewhere in between, they need a little bit more curated care, but not so much that they won't grow if they're not getting exactly what they need. So the bad news is that orchids, who are also called highly sensitive people, do kind of feel the environment in a more attuned way. And that's great if you're receiving a positive environment, but it can be incredibly taxing when the environment isn't going your way. And on the plus side, orchids, when they're grown beautifully, are like so robust and strong and incredible. And so that's what I want you to think about. Like, oh, I know that I have an orchid kid, or I am an orchid person myself. I walk into a room and I can tell how people feel. I can attune quickly to the person in the room who's uncomfortable or anxious or angry. And I might even take that feeling on. Or I can hear the sound of the air conditioning buzzing that no one else is complaining about. Or like the wind feels stronger on my face while I notice other people are just kind of bopping around. So if you are that person or your child is, you have to take better, kind of more intentional care in your parenting, but not so much that you create a fragility, because you need to teach orchids to live in this world where everybody isn't going to have capacity to give them everything they need. And so it's a beautiful, delicate balance. Whereas if you have a dandelion, and if you do, because you don't worry about it. You're just like, plans are changing and you know that there won't be a meltdown over it. The blue cup wasn't available, the red cup is now available. This is going to be fine. Or maybe there's like a grumbling for a minute and then everybody's back to fine. There's a change of plans and you're not walking on eggshells. Those are dandelions. It's, in grown-up versions, the sound of the humming of the air conditioning isn't kind of bothering you while you're in the middle of doing something. It's just like you don't even notice it. On the downside of that is you also might not notice when other people need a little bit more thoughtfulness and sensitivity. It's harder for you maybe to attune to other people, so you have to pay closer attention when you want to connect with someone who is more sensitive. And tulips are somewhere in between. You can't change the flower that you are growing. That is, the seed was planted, they are who they are. They're going to be that flower. It may not be one of those three flowers because, like I said, humans are a little bit more complex than that. But for the purposes of explaining this, I think it's easier to think orchid and dandelion and somewhere in between. But keep these principles in mind in that context. So the principles are relationship, reflection, regulation, rules, and repair. Regulation is the hardest of these five to me. You might say repair is the hardest to you. You have to kind of know your temperament and know your personality to assess what you're going to have to work on more or less. And so, as I'm going to show you a slide if I can pull it off. There, I did. I did it. Okay. So these are the five principles. And I'm going to go through each one, but I just want you to pay attention to whichever one you bristle most at is probably the one that's most important for you to pay attention to. And if you invest in these five principles that are not made up by me, I made them into our words because I just think it's easier to remember things that way. But these are all rooted in decades of science, and I chose them because they are from robust science, not like, oh, new study that found this one time. It's been replicated for decades and is now part of what we know from neurobiology and neuroscience. So it's not just the social science that it came from, but it's now moved on to, we actually know from being able to look at brains and physiology and nervous systems how real this is and how relevant it is. And so I'm going to start with relationship. And we know what relationship is. It's human connection, it's attunement, it's having shared ground and basic trust, joy. And it is the very foundation that kind of everything is based on. So I live in Los Angeles. And so I want you to think about when you live in Los Angeles or any area that has earthquakes. And you could say this if you're in a hurricane area, etc. Generally speaking, there are tons and tons of little earthquakes in Los Angeles all the time that we don't even feel. And when I bought a house there, one of the things that you have to factor in is how strong is the foundation to withstand earthquakes, big and small. And if your house is built on solid foundation, these earthquakes are like a little off-putting, but I came from New York City where I didn't grow up with earthquakes. So I was like, what is this? And it was kind of scary in the beginning, but then I realized, okay, my house is so fit, so built to withstand these earthquakes. I don't need to panic. And so now they happen. I don't like it, but I'm not like, oh, look, I don't have a painting above my bed or pictures above my bed or a light. You know, you have to kind of set your environment up a little differently. But generally speaking, I feel pretty good because I retrofit my house. And I'm going to talk about retrofitting. And I just want you to just remember that when we get to repair. But here's the other thing I want to tell you about relationship that I think is really inspiring and heartening. When we think about stress, remember I said resilience is the capacity to bounce back after significant sources of, adversity, setback, and significant sources of stress. Stress has a bad rap. Some stress is really good. In fact, it's called in the research positive stress, and it is not only good for you, but it's actually necessary for resilience. And part of the relationship is knowing when is a stressor positive, tolerable, or toxic. Toxic stressors are harmful. They are associated with long-term health implications, not just mental health, but physical health, higher rates of diabetes, asthma, heart disease. There's no good thing that comes out of toxic stress. Resilience does not come from that. But positive stress is necessary for resilience. Then there's tolerable stress, which has capacity to grow resilience. And tolerable stressors are not necessarily different than toxic stressors in presentation, but the difference is there's one caregiver that is connected and present for that child in the face of the stress. And that changes the categorization from toxic to tolerable, which has capacity to grow resilience. And I think that's incredible. That means that, like, just having a strong relationship, being the person your child comes to, being the person your child feels seen by, being the person that your child knows will sit next to them while they're sobbing and not fix it, because that would be not giving them skills, but sitting with them and letting them know they're not alone. That's how you build these close relationships that bolster resilience. I could go on, but we don't have time. So I'm doing very short versions. Obviously, I wrote a whole book on this and I tried to get really practical so that we can apply this not just like theoretically in big ways, but to your everyday experiences from, discipline to potty training to peer relationships to substance use in high school to, you know, school and home and the whole thing. But ultimately, if you don't feel like reading, this is the basic concept. Reflection is a big part of it too, because reflection means that you can pause. You could take a breath, lower your shoulders, let go of the tension, and think about the big picture. What does my child need? What do I need? Where's this coming from? How did I learn this reaction? How was I parented? Like the big stuff and the little stuff. But you need to reflect in order to figure out how to act willingly and intentionally versus on autopilot, the way you would have been, imitating your parents that didn't react in a way that you think was meaningful or helpful. And also so that you have capacity to self-regulate. Regulation is one of the biggest, if not the biggest predictor of success as we know it. It's much more effective than high IQ. And it essentially means that we have paused to reflect to breathe, and to be able to pivot from that reflection to responding with intention. It is a way of saying, I know how to manage my emotions. I'm not controlling my emotions. I'm just recognizing them and not ruled by them. So I'm going to just look at the chat to make sure that there's nothing that I need to clarify. Oh, we're getting the ages. Okay. Well, it turns out that we have, as suspected, a massive age range from the littlest to the teenagers. So hopefully this is relevant to everyone and it will make sense. So regulation is huge. There are so many tools to help learn how to regulate, but the best tool, the best way to learn is if you were raised by someone who was co-regulating with you. When your adult nervous system helps a child's immature nervous system regulate, that nervous system grows into a self-regulated adult. Now, some temperaments are way less regulated than others by nature, and they need more effort. But generally speaking, self-regulation is a skill that's developed in full between 18 and 28 years old. That means you've got a long time where you are co-regulating with your kids. And frankly, we co-regulate all the time. If you've ever walked into a room and you've seen people really angry or really calm, just like experiencing something, you're going to catch that emotion. You're going to catch their nervous system. So like if there's tension in the air, even if nobody's saying anything, you're going to know. And we know that emotions are kind of contagious. Regulation is super contagious. So the best thing you can do for your kids is grow kids who've had co-regulation their entire lives. How do you co-regulate? You figure out how to learn to regulate yourself so that whenever something comes up, and of course, nobody's getting this right all the time. I actually stress a lot in my book and in my work, more often than not, which is a much lower bar than getting an A+. You just need to, more often than not, do this, and it has a huge impact. So I like to think of regulation, and there are many ways to regulate. The most popular way in the world is to just breathe, because it signals to your brain that you are not under attack. And one of the things that we do when we dysregulate is we think we are under attack and in danger, we're being threatened. Even if the threat is that we're not getting the cup color we chose, even if the threat is that we're worried that our child is so upset from a tantrum that they are going to be in danger, even if we're angry because someone talked back to us, these could accidentally get input into our brain as danger and threat. And so we go into dysregulation, fight, flight, or freeze. Problem is, you don't really need to go into that very often. That's really should, in the most sort of best version of ourselves, that should only come out when we are in actual harm's way. And so a really good skill is to learn the difference between real and imagined threat by regulating yourself and saying, I'm not being chased by a bear or a shark, in my case, is the thing I say to myself, because that's like my fear. So you take a breath whenever something happens. If there's not an emergency, no one's going to be hurt physically or emotionally, then you can pause. If your child's running across the street and if you don't scream at them and grab them, they're going to get hurt. This is not a time to regulate. You should be in fight, flight, or freeze. You should be screaming. This is about the things where if you pause and breathe and then respond, it's not going to harm anyone. And I really think about this like punching the passcode into your alarm system, like finding out what is the warning sign that you're about to lose your mind. And is it a warning sign that can tell you, okay, I think I'm under attack, but there is no bear. I am safe. Now I've regulated. Okay, now I am going to lend that nervous system to my young person in my life who is totally dysregulated. You're not going to say this to them, but they're going to feel it in their nervous system because nervous systems are contagious. I could talk about regulation all day, but I want to have time for questions and we still have more things to get through. So the next principle is rules. Now, rules means that we are not afraid to set and hold limits and the boundaries that are consistent with our values and in a way that makes our children feel safe. So this is really unpopular in the current sort of Instagram culture of parenting. Now, I'm on Instagram. I do, I'm on, I have my podcast, I have my book. Like, I am trying to give information to parents, and Instagram is a great way. But it's also potentially a way to make people believe or misunderstand the science. And one of the ways that I think social media has misunderstood the science is to suggest that rules are like from a different time, that we're not supposed to have rules, that we're all equal in the household. And like, if your rules upset your kids, that somehow you need to change them. So if you struggle to have these rules, recognize that they're actually a core part of healthy relationships. So I see a raised hand, so I'm going to take a pause for a second. Um,
If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. That will be better than doing the hand raise, and we will for sure get to a majority of the questions, barring that there's not like hundreds. And so I will keep an eye out. But yeah, any questions, pop them in the chat.
Thank you, thank you. I'll try to keep the chat open, so I can have a look. So one thing that I like to ask when I'm thinking about what rules actually matter in the house, because it's a waste of time if you have too many rules, nobody's paying attention to them. So you want to ask yourself, is this rule consistent with my values? And is it going to keep my child or the people around me more safe than if I didn't have the rule, either emotionally or physically? And if it's not important for your values, and if it's not relevant to emotional and physical safety, it's a waste of your time and it undermines your actual meaningful rules. So I want to encourage you to figure out what your rules are and keep in mind that if you have too many of them, you lose your credibility, but not having enough makes your kids feel very unsafe, even if they don't like them, especially as they get into the toddler years when they're supposed to push the boundaries, or teenagers, forget it. They're going to convince you how horrible your rules are, but they need them. If they didn't need them, they could be adults in the world and totally fine. They don't have a fully developed frontal lobe. It would be not a good idea if they were fully in charge of themselves. We want to support autonomy, but not so much that we're now saying you're in charge. Okay. So, oh, I see. There wasn't a question. Somebody just bumped it. The last principle that I want to talk to you about goes back to what I was saying about the retrofitting of your house in earthquake zones. Repair. Repair is it's like my absolute favorite thing about the research on human development, which is that repair is not only the capacity to return to a place of alignment and trust after a fight or consequence or a meltdown, but it's actually necessary for relationships to grow strong. So if you think about how to build muscles, you can't build muscles without small, tiny tears when you lift weights, right? You're lifting weights in the gym. You have to have tiny little tears that then grow the muscles bigger. If you push yourself too far, you can obviously do terrible damage. But assuming you have the right weights, they're straining, but they're not breaking, you're going to be building muscles. And that's what repair does in the context of relationships. It actually builds stronger relationships. That's why you notice that you grow much closer with people when you've gotten through a hard time and gotten back to connection. Because then you know, oh, this is a strong relationship. This can withstand little earthquakes. So What do you do if you grew up without repair and you didn't have that kind of sense of security in your relationships? You would retrofit just like you retrofit a house. Like if the house was built and it wasn't built earthquake safe, there are things that you can do to give it a sturdiness in that foundation. And it's the same thing that we can do, but we must make sure our foundation is sturdy so that we have capacity to see that there can be discord and repair. Some key things that you should notice that will tell you if you can't do this. If someone gets mad at you and you just avoid them, or if somebody cries and you want to fix it and just let go of your boundary because you're afraid that they'll be mad at you. Somewhere at some point along the way, you learned that it was dangerous to have discord and you'll do anything to prevent it. But actually, that's because you were not given the secure attachment that tells you we can handle this. This is a nothing burger, you know? Repair is so important. It happens constantly. In fact, in the research, when Ed Tronick, who's the first person to come up with this decades ago, was looking at the micro interactions between mothers and babies, he found that they were only attuned and connected in relationship 30% of the time, and the rest of the time was rupture and repair. That was what was a normal, healthy, securely attached relationship. So you don't have to be like, I'm so like, we're so connected all the time. No, you come in and out. The key is how you come back together. And that's how we measure secure attachment in general, which is sort of the developmental psychology way of saying healthy relationship. So those are 5 key principles. I also love repair because it's permission to screw up, and it's not just because people are human and you will screw up, so why not give you permission? It's because it's actually necessary that you screw up in order to raise kids who know that they can screw up and they don't berate themselves for it and shame themselves for it. And it's necessary to grow relationships because you can't come back into connection from being disconnected if you're always attached and connected. I'm going to go through the shortest sort of skills that we want to build in our kids, but I'm not going to go deep because I want time for questions. But these are the 5 that you build in yourself. And then there's the understanding that kids, generally speaking, are adaptive, some more than others. Okay. We've talked about temperament, so orchids are less adaptive than dandelions. They're every kid's going to have capacity for adaptation, that adaptive capacity that is resilience building when they've had the environmental factor of one loving caregiver that looks at those 5 R's very seriously so that they can make positive adjustments. There are the factors that strengthen resilience because they're skills that we grow in our kids. And these are the factors. I like to remember it by thinking of games because, again, it's just easier to remember. Gratitude is a skill to grow, autonomy, motivation, empathy, and self regulation. Those are the 5 most powerful skills that we can build in our kids. And given the world of AI and technology, and that we have an uncertain future more so than we ever have, or it certainly feels that way, these are the skills that are going to be most important, and they conveniently are the most highly linked with resilience, and they are growable. And that's why I like to talk about them. I want to take a pause to open up to questions. And I'm going to just check in.
while we are waiting for some questions to come, someone pinged me individually. Is there a way that you can give just a few examples for what repair looks like for maybe kind of that toddler age group, or even too, if there's like that repair of like, um, where sometimes parents do lose their cool and toddlers, even sometimes with
Mhm.
with each other. Like, how do you make that situation feel okay, especially maybe when you're standing in a moment of shame? And then also too for teenagers, kind of hitting those two. I know people would love to hear some of those examples of how the conversation would go or the script.
Okay.
So
Okay, so I'm going to give you some scripts, but full disclosure, I loathe scripts. I give them because I know that they can help give ideas. I don't want you to feel robotic. Like this is my way of using language, but use it however sounds like you. But let's say your toddler is really mad and they're crying and crying and crying because you won't give them the remote control. And you know that you can't give them the remote control because the remote control is going to break if they start pressing the buttons and all that. And so you're putting the remote control away, but now you've got an angry toddler. So they've disconnected from you. Or an alternative scenario is you weren't paying attention and like you were looking at your phone and you kind of disconnected from them. In both cases, you can do one of two things. You can physically reconnect, sort of with touch and with your facial expressions until you see that they're back with you. Or you can verbally say, Mommy's so sorry, or Daddy, or whomever. I'm so sorry. I was looking at my phone and you were trying to talk to me. Tell me what you wanted to say. Or you're so sad you wanted the remote. You're mad you wanted the remote and I can't give it to you because I need to keep the remote safe. Let's go over here and do something else. Also fine. Or let's say you yelled at your preschooler and you're like, I've had it. I've told you 5 times you need to do blah, blah, blah. Whenever you feel like you have passed the point of no return, take a breath if you can access it. It might take you an hour. It might take you 2 minutes. It might take you a day. It probably will take you 2 minutes to be like, oh man, I'm in a shame spiral. Why did I just do that? This is just a little kid. Take your breath. You're regulating your nervous system. Everybody's safe. I made a mistake. Okay, now I'm going to turn to my child and I'm going to say, that must have really scared you. I got mad and I lost my temper where I yelled. I'm so sorry. That was because I was making a mistake, not because of you. And I love you. I'm going to work on that. That's it. It can also be as simple as, you know, you're watching, like you're having a fight with an older child or a teenager and something's going on. And you don't really need to have like a deep conversation about all of it. Sometimes it can be you had this fight, somebody stormed away, and then it's later in the day. You maybe did school drop off fighting in the car, and then you come back. You're picking them up, and you just say, I'm sorry, this morning I was totally out of line. I was having a tough morning and I took it out on you, and that has nothing to do with you, and I'm really sorry. But most importantly, you are probably going to notice that they're like, what? Like they had their whole day and they weren't thinking about it. But just in case you're saying, like, I make mistakes too, and I own them. Owning your mistakes is big because it allows your kids to see that even the great leaders of their life are fallible. Trying to think of another example. Let's say your teenager did something really bad and you're like beside yourself and you scream at them and you say something you regret because in doing so you decided to call into question who they are as people. versus like criticizing their behavior. I think that's the thing that gets people most ashamed is, like criticizing your personhood. Because that, is more shaming than criticizing behavior, which is like what you got to do sometimes. That's how people learn about behavior. So in that case, you say, when you're regulated, is now a good time to talk. I just want to tell you, I love you for exactly who you are. Yes, you made a mistake. I got so scared that the way I handled it was to scream at you. When what I really meant to say was, I was so worried about you that I went into a panic. I can't let you do that again. But I am so glad you're safe and I love you and I absolutely want you to come to me. I'm sorry I, flew off the handle, whatever that is. So are those enough examples of repair?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm having a hard time unmuting. So we have a few other questions coming through.
Okay.
And one is, just let me scroll back up. Uh, How important is it that both parents agree on the same set of rules? And then also, if there is a discrepancy and there is one where mom or dad or whatever partner maybe does find themselves more so being the fun partner versus the one that is holding more boundaries, like how do you address that dynamic too, especially um, when it's like a younger one where then, the little wants to go to dad because he's way more fun than mom. And then like just that whole dynamic. So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
important and then the dynamic as well.
So you can't control other people. So yes, would I love it if everybody had like the same family mission statement, the same values, and you were kind of like, okay, I have a whole chapter on creating a family mission statement and family values because they're so individual. And so you can set them up for yourself, and then you can say to your partner, co-parent, should we set them up for the family? And then as your kids get older, you can do it with them and see how that goes. But if you're not on the same page, it only takes one caregiver that follows through on relationship reflection, regulation, rules, and repair in order for a child to have a resilient and positive outcome. It doesn't take two perfect parents. It'd be great. It's all gravy and it's wonderful and it's ideal. But then there's a possibility that both parents are doing relationship reflection, regulation, rules, and repair, but those rules are different for each of them, and some are more fun than others, and all of that. Somebody's better at one than the other. Some people are better at rules, and some are better at fun and connection. And then I would say, if you this takes a lot of courage, but if you're really good at being strict and having clear and concise boundaries, but you're like missing the connection part, let go of those limits because you're going to have them. You're good at that. And ask your partner or co-parent, can you take on some of those? And I'm going to take on some of the fun. And I'm going to count on you to take on a little bit of the burden on the other side. And I'll take on a little bit of the burden of the fun. It's not that much of a burden. And vice versa. If you're like always the fun parent, but never setting the limits, the downside is your kids don't feel safe around you. They feel connected, but they don't necessarily think of you as like the adult there for them. And so you want to work on that too. So I think one of the ways to do it is to come together if you're in a good co-parenting situation and say, what are our strengths and weaknesses as co-parents? And can we each kind of give the other one an opportunity to strengthen the weaker muscle? The other important piece is you can feel like one parent is more beloved than the other. But a lot of times that's just like going to happen and it's not due to any particular reason about rules. It's due to that moment in time, or sometimes like I can have these strict, clear limits, but am I picking ones that are both aligned with values and totally relevant to safety of self and others? And if they're not, maybe you do need to let go of some of them and focus more on connection. but you still keep all the ones that matter to you. But if you have connection in there, it doesn't matter how many rules you have. So I'm looking at this question about self-regulation isn't fully developed until 18 to 28 years old. I have a 25-year-old son who's still making drastic and dangerous choices. So the problem when you're talking about an adult, a young adult, is that at that point, they're off in the world, and unless they're coming to you for support, like literal support financially or emotional support, you don't necessarily have the sort of the same space to make rules. You can set limits and boundaries for yourself, though. You can say, these are dangerous choices. I'm not enabling these choices. I'm not paying for these choices. I'm not supporting these choices, but I support you and I love you. But in terms of getting someone to acknowledge a need for change, that's in the category of like, you're trying to get them to do something, but you're much better off getting you to figure out what can you do to connect with them. Because once you've connected with someone, it removes the flooding of the brain with stress hormones, and they don't view you as attacking them. So then they're open to change.
We have one other question too that popped up that I think
Okay.
got lost in the chat, but I'm very curious about this one. Strategies for addressing a 3-year-old who has developed knee-jerk reactions of pinching, hitting older siblings specifically, but also maybe not. Uh, but she has a lot of language, so it's not an issue. And then when you give her a strong no, she will cry.
Okay, so the first thing I want to remind you of is that if you give a strong no to hitting or putting someone in danger and your child cries, that's okay. What they're saying is that was startling, that was scary, I feel bad. Those are all the things you should feel when you hurt someone. That's part of your moral rudder. So we can't be afraid of our kids crying at things that don't feel good. They have to know that it's okay that they're crying. You're going to soothe them from crying. You can say, I love you. I know that was really scary, or you really wanted to hit that person. You can soothe, you can love, you can cuddle, but they still needed to hear no, you can't hit. And so if crying is their reaction, that's okay. I say this ad nauseum. I think it would be a great bumper sticker. It's very dorky, might be slightly annoying, but all feelings are welcome. All behaviors are not. So keep in mind, your child is allowed to cry because you said no to hitting, but they're not allowed to hit. That's an example. You can soothe the feelings, you can cuddle, you can love, but you can't allow the hitting. We're oftentimes with our limits and boundaries looking for approval. A lot of people say to me, I tried that, it didn't work. Like I tried telling my child that it was time to turn the TV off, it didn't work. What I think people mean is that my child was bummed out and didn't listen, and I didn't feel comfortable just taking the remote and turning it off and putting it away because I wanted them to agree to it. They don't have to agree. That's like a misunderstanding of sensitive caregiving. You could be sensitive. You can say, I know you don't want to turn the TV off right now. Remember, I gave you 5 minutes notice. I know it's hard. You can either turn it off or I can turn it off for you if that's too hard. The TV goes off, your child can be mad, they can cry. They're not responsible for loving the limits that you're setting. That's not their job. They can be really bummed out about it. In fact, it wouldn't have to be a rule if they were excited about it. So keep reminding yourself, oh, right, they don't have to agree to this. It's I'm still sort of the leader of the household. And the difference between a leader and a totalitarian, like boss of the house that's using fear is that you're also sensitive and loving. So that's where the all feelings are welcome. All behaviors are not. You get to feel your feelings. Authoritarian would be you're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to hit and you're not allowed to cry. That's ridiculous because then you're trying to control how someone's emotional reaction is going to be, and that's not helpful or healthy. I'm trying to think. I do have a slide that I think might be helpful. Um, that just makes me laugh for a little levity. Um, so one of the things that helps kids with hitting is at the same time to show your empathy to their emotions. So, like, they were feeling such big feelings that they felt like there was only one way to get it out, and it was to hit. So, if you can express that to them after you've said no, because, like, they're not listening to you in the heat of the moment. This might be an hour later or in the evening when you're like cuddling before bed. Um, you might say, like, when they first hit, or if you are lucky enough to catch them in the act before it happens, then you would say, I won't let you hit. I won't let you hit. Keep your hands to yourself. So you've now said what they're not allowed to do and then what they are allowed to do. They're allowed to keep their hands to themselves. They're allowed to wiggle their fingers in the air. They're allowed to clench their fists and say, roar, I'm mad. They're not allowed to hit. Hitting hurts. So you kind of are like, no hitting. Here's why it hurts. Here's what you can do instead. It's 3 directions. It's short and that's it. And then if they cry, you just cuddle and hug them and you just say, I know. And you're just there for them. And um, over time, they realize, like, I'm not supposed to do that. And also, I'm still loved even when I make those mistakes. Um, I'm sort of reading. So what's a good line? Okay, there. Yeah. uh,
I had a question come in a direct chat
sure.
to me.
Okay.
What do you do when one child is an orchid and the other one is more of a dandelion, and you end up your parenting styles, I'm like paraphrasing, your parenting styles not cater to the orchid, but you want to do more 50-50 split. So kind of how to navigate all the flowers as a bouquet, instead of
Mhm.
just the one.
The one. Well, it's interesting because orchids are kind of amazing in that, like, they know how to get taken care of because they require more support. So in many ways, orchids are like clearly supposed to exist because if you have an orchid, you know you have an orchid. For those of you who don't, you're probably like, what are you talking about? But the downside is if you have this easier going kid, you can tend to think like, oh, I don't want to deal with the like meltdown of the orchid. So we'll just sort of cater to that orchid's wants. So I think the key is you can do 50-50, like half the time one kid gets to choose. I'm making this up because I think this is probably very unrealistic, but let's say 2 of the days a week, the dandelion chooses what's for dinner. 2 of the days a week, the orchid chooses the menu. And you know that the days the dandelion chooses the menu are like going to give you such a headache that you're like, can you please just choose something that your brother likes? So instead of that, just think to yourself, okay, my little orchid is going to be pissed off 2 of those days. I know this, but this isn't going to change the fact that we're going to do it because I also need my easygoing kid to do their thing. But I will say to them, I totally get it. It looks like your brother's choosing mealtime Tuesday and Thursday. How do you want to navigate that? Do you want to plan in advance? Do you want to roar in your bedroom? Do you want to think about what you're going to have the next night so you can distract yourself. So you're giving tools to your orchid about how to deal in the world, basically, when they can't have their way.
Perfect. That answers that question perfectly, I think. Are there any other questions? I've been keeping an eye on the chat, but I don't see any other questions as of right now.
Well, that is well timed because I can give you a parting exercise.
Perfect.
Um, so, and I see in the chat somebody making a joke that they're not so bad, about when I talked about how to respond to hitting. And I just want to say that everyone here is not so bad because everyone here is here. Like, the only people that I know are absolutely doing the more often than not of parenting the way that our kids need to be parented are you guys. Like, if you're interested and you're showing up to parenting talk, I'm just not worried about you. Do I think all of us lose our cool sometimes? Do I think a lot of us lean a little too permissive and maybe struggle to set limits, or do we set too many limits and maybe use fear sometimes? Sure. But on balance, like, if you're curious and interested in here, you are good enough parents. And I'm very excited for your kids and for our future. I think the trickiest thing is that who's listening to Raising Good Humans podcast? Who's reading the 5 principles of parenting? Who's looking at this stuff, right? Like, it's probably parents who are already awesome because they're open, interested, and curious. And so I'm not like, I say this because I think everybody should really give themselves grace and a giant kind of high five because this is hard stuff and it's the middle of an August day and you came up. I mean, I think that's so incredible. So this parting exercise I have um is essentially to write a family mission statement, not now, but when you go home, write down for 5 minutes, like set a timer for 5 minutes and do like your, the way you think or want your adult child to describe you. Set the timer. Let's say they're describing you to your future grandchild. I want you to set that timer for 5 minutes. And then at the end of the 5 minutes, circle every value that you see, just every description that feels like it connects to like who you want to be and who you feel like you are in that household. And that will get you closer to figuring out your mission statement, which is basically just saying, in this family, we value these 3 or 4 things above all else. And if you can narrow it down enough, then every time you're struggling, whether it's to let a kid go to a party that you don't feel comfortable with, or it's what school you're choosing, or it's what friends to have over, or whether or not to give your child the blue cup when they really wanted the red cup, you can look at those values and think about your mission statement and your big picture goals and think, does this align with moving that forward? And another fun thing to do when your kids get older is to say to them, what do you think our family's 3 or 4 most important values are? And if your kids come up with something completely different from what you think yours are, then you can have a moment of reflection and think, I either have to change my execution here, like how am I parenting that my kids are thinking that my focus is completely different than I thought? Or maybe you just change your mission and say, I think they have a better handle on it than I did. I just want to thank all of you for being here again. I know how busy everyone is. Thank you for your trust. I really hope everybody leaves with like a little something that you can take home and a much bigger something of feeling like you've really got this.
Thank you everyone for tuning in and kind of learning alongside of me. We have another fun event coming up. Um, the Caregiver's Guide to the Balancing Act. And so I just have it shared. Um, up on the screen. But I would love to see you all in attendance on August 27th, just kind of approaching a different way, kind of making sure that we ourselves as caregivers are fully supported. And so the QR code is there, but also it is up on our website. But I really appreciate you tuning in and learning alongside of me. I know I have a 2-year-old at home, and so there are a few fun things I definitely took notes on, specifically around the power of no and the tears. Like, it's okay not to be scared of the tears. So that was a big highlighted underlined section for me. But until next time, friends.
Thank you so much.